Oh, wow. If Americans who understand what drives inflation and the boom-bust cycle in economics already didn't have reason to cringe at the monopolistic existence of the Federal Reserve, the newest wrinkle in that century-old monstrosity just became clear. Thanks to, you got it, COVID-19 and the Washington, D.C. CARES Act. Hi everybody, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. You know, Monday afternoon saw the Federal Reserve unanimously vote to do what many free market economists had warned since April that they would do. On Tuesday, they ended up acting on that vote using a clause in the March 2020 CARES Act to directly buy corporate bonds. As Bob Edelman writes for The New American, on March 23rd, the Fed saw that highly rated bonds of major U.S. companies weren't being traded for fear that even those companies would be forced to default on making their interest payments due to the COVID-19 business lockdowns. And so the Fed announced its extraordinary plan to back up the bond market by saying it would buy up exchange-traded bond funds directly. In April, the Fed expanded its authority into buying up junk bonds, and Monday's announcement follows logically. The Fed will now buy up any bond, with certain limitations, of course, subject to change, of any company that appears to be in trouble. Why is this bad? Hold on, check that. Why is this new poison added to the already toxic existence of the Federal Reserve as monopolistic money issuer, interest rate setter, U.S. debt facilitator through, of course, buying of the U.S. debt instruments, which the U.S. pays back through taxes or more debt, repeating the cycle? And how is it even worse than the disastrous fact that the CARES Act already skirted the Constitution to offer $500 billion in loans to big corporations? Well, to understand that, one first must grapple with the fact that since its inception in 1913, the Federal Reserve has replaced the U.S. government as the monopolistic issuer of currency we're all allowed to legally use in what are supposedly free market exchanges. Of course, if a statute mandates what currency you can use in trades, it's not a free trade. And of course, this currency control, coupled with the federal government thirst for ready cash to fund its ever-expanding welfare and international nation-building programs, sees the Fed issuing ever-increasing numbers of reserve notes. And of course, it has yet to prove that it actually has gold or assets on reserve, which inflates the money supply, sees early favorites such as big banks and the stock market getting to spend the new cash before prices rise, causes reckless investments and the boom of the boom-bust cycle, and eventually creates artificially higher consumer demand relative to slower upward productivity curves, which in turn leads to the bust. And of course, it's essential to understand that even if the Fed didn't exist and the U.S. Treasury were the monopoly issuer of legal money, the Treasury would just print up more cash itself, duplicating the cycle. Only free market competition and competing private currencies can allow consumers to choose which currency they want to use based on their evaluation of whether they think the currency is backed by something valuable. Which brings us back to the legal monopoly of the Fed. Since we're prohibited from using anything other than Fed notes as legal currency, the U.S. has given that banking cartel a lot of power to hand out cash and buy U.S. bonds. And now, with the CARES Act, the D.C. politicians have handed it a superpower. As Edelman writes, and so now the Fed announces that it will begin buying a broad and diversified portfolio of corporate bonds to support market liquidity and the availability of credit for large employers. What this announcement does is encourage zombie corporations, which couldn't sell bonds because of their clear inability to service them, to issue new debt, which, with the Fed's backstop, can now be considered investment grade by Wall Street. And that implies something very, very bad. It's a poison apple. and it's got a big razor blade hidden inside for added destructive capacity. We have a single entity given the monopoly on the issuance of currency. It can lend to all banks, buys US bonds, and controls the interest rates. And now it can literally buy debt instruments from corporations. It can create money out of nothing and now directly hand it to special corporations. It also means that the Fed can buy bonds from governments other than the federal government, including bankrupt states, which means huge expansions of state spending, more cronyism, and more concentration on state government rather than on private initiative and risk analysis for business ventures. That's a powerful mix to inspire even more reckless business ventures and moral hazard mistakes. And it also means that businesses involved in the long-standing field of credit rating will no longer be needed because everyone can get bailed out and pay back their debts with more money that the Fed gives to them. And economists can think of few things more inclined to inspire reckless business risks. Now, previously, the moral hazard had at least some retardation in it because banks only had the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, known as the FDIC, to inspire dumb lending, which led to a collapse in the housing market in 1991, by the way, and the loans that they could get from the Federal Reserve. But now, businesses themselves can operate in the red, just like the US government, issue bonds, sell them to the Federal Reserve, have the Fed purchase them, and then when they can't pay them back, issue more bonds, and then have them bought by the Fed as well, just like what the US government is doing. This also means that new startup ventures that try to compete with the big established businesses will have a hard time competing as independent companies and will tend to offer their ideas to established firms. And it doesn't even stop there. As Nancy Marshall-Genzer notes for marketplace.org, the Fed is also making this program anonymous, just buying up corporate bonds without anybody asking it to. That's pretty important to know. Unfortunately, she also quite blithely adds, this avoids any stigma from companies requesting Fed help. Actually, what it does is negate any possible hint of accountability and openness in what is clearly a crony capitalist, aka mercantilist, aka fascist economic system that has been created by the central government and now can run rampant, surreptitiously handing out fake, inflated money to friends, hiding their profligate and reckless business decisions, making insolvency impossible to detect, and of course, artificially pumping up the stock market on an ever flimsier and unsound set of so-called fundamentals that can be manipulated and tweaked by DC and the Fed at any time. If Americans ever operated under the mistaken impression that they live and work in a free country, this ought to act as a bucket of cold water and wake them out of their pleasant dream. So let's conclude with this telling quote from Ms. Genzer's piece. Quote, "There's always a concern that if you're looking to the Federal Reserve as opposed to the market for financing, that you might be revealing something about how desperate you are for financing," said Catherine Judge, a Columbia University law professor, which is the fundamental point. Participants in a free market want and need to know if a business is desperate for financing. We need this signal information to decide where to invest our hard-earned cash as lenders in one-on-one deals or through the stock market. Clearly, the politicians in DC and the Fed board don't want you to know, which really is all you need to know about those people. The ones who command the corrupt system of collectivist US cronyism. Wow. This is a much bigger deal than the media are letting on. And I'm so glad we got to share this. Please share this with friends. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button and subscribe. And hit the bell, because the bell tells you, supposedly, when new videos appear on YouTube. And please visit us on Facebook and head over to MRCTV.org to find out the panoply of stories that the whole team is writing and producing. And if you want some great MRC swag, go to MRC-store. Thanks for being part of this circle of friends, everybody. Keep your sanity hats on. It's going to be a crazy ride. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.